Welcome to the FCC. It's absolutely wonderful to have a full house today. My name is Tara Joseph. I'm vice president of the club and a journalist with Reuters here in Hong Kong. I'm going to start with a slightly depressing list of recent events in Hong Kong: Occupy Central and a disenfranchised youth, a falling stock market and for lease sales signs up around stores around Hong Kong. I won't even mention the booksellers and the riots that we had over Chinese New Year. So with all of that in mind, what is the future for Hong Kong, and is this city doomed? Well, our speaker today, Sir David Tang, really represents all that was he personifies the vibrant Hong Kong that many of us knew in earlier years. He started a fashion chain that represented luxury and a great mark for Hong Kong, the China Club. He's known as a concert pianist. He's a columnist for the Financial Times. So very curious to hear his view on where Hong Kong is headed. Sir David Tang.
Thank you very much. I'm so old now, I've got to switch specs. Thank you very much for coming. I thought there were going to be about 20 or 30 of you, but I was told that there were a bit more, and I suddenly got into a panic. And so last night, after dinner, I went home and I wrote out a speech, just in case I lost my memory this morning. Anyway, I'm going to talk very quickly about what I think has happened to Hong Kong and where it might go and what we need to do. And I'll be very happy to take questions, intelligent questions, afterwards. A Martian reading our chief executive's 2016 policy address might be forgiven for believing that all is hunky-dory in town and that it has landed on the best planet in the solar system. The policy address mentioned how to innovate for the economy, improve livelihood, foster harmony, and share prosperity. What better headings could there be? The only problem is that human beings on Earth lie. The Martian will soon find out enough, because it is intelligent and has got eyes and ears, that in fact the policy address was a silent contortion of the truth. Does anyone here really believe that the government, our government, foster harmony or share prosperity? Does the government itself believe that it fosters harmony and shares prosperity? I believe these words are patronizing and condescending at best, and at worst, meaningless. In any event, in the policy address, there was not a half cedilla on the umbrella movement last year, perhaps the single most significant political event in Hong Kong since the riots in 1966, nor a mention on the defeat within LegCo of the introduction of universal suffrage for the election of the chief executive. Indeed, the entire 2 hours spent in delivering his address, the chief executive did not give the slightest hint of an amoeba of political or social dissatisfaction. Yet a great deal of dissatisfaction is prevalent. It was no surprise, therefore, that even before the chief executive began his address, 4 members of LegCo were forcibly removed for protesting against his favorite pastime of sweeping what he regards as rotten political dust under the carpet. The supreme paradox to me is the opening line of his address. Since taking office, the current term government has focused its efforts on promoting democracy, so C.Y. Leung snugly said. This was his first sentence. Whoever wrote that for the chief executive, if he himself did not write it, must be a comedian, or perhaps a monkey who accidentally typed out those words on a typewriter. What it all means to me is the disingenuousness of our chief executive and government, and the contempt with which they hold us, the citizens of Hong Kong. But should we have expected anything else? I mean, after all, throughout the umbrella movement, for example, our chief executive steadfastly refused to meet the protesters. We should remember that even Li Peng, the hardcore, hardline Chinese premier at the time, received Wu'erkashi, and what's more, in full view of national television. By comparison, our chief executive hid behind the azaleas at Government House and pushed out that diminutive figure of the Chief Secretary, Carrie Lam, who fluffed around with absurd preconditions and insisted on meeting the students behind closed doors. You understand how parochial we seem already? It all further means that our chief executive does not seem to have the bottle to confront difficult issues. Yet that is precisely the one quality that we should demand in our leader. We certainly don't want one who totally ignores the heat of our political and social conditions and instead spend half of his speech pontificating the woolly symbols of one belt, one road, which was mentioned 48 times. Quite apart from the embarrassing anxiousness towards the Chinese president, what on earth would an ordinary citizen of Hong Kong care or understand about one belt, one road? I even doubt if a singular tycoon in Hong Kong could name more than 2 countries on the original Silk Road. That was the inspiration for one belt, one road. Is our chief executive really trying to push Hong Kong trade and our financial services across Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Iran, Iraq, and inexorably into the heart of the terrifying Islamic State? Borat might have been able to get away with it with humor, but hardly our somber chief executive with any degree of seriousness. Therefore, if I were to hold out any hope for a better Hong Kong, I would first wish for a much stronger and much more effective chief executive. I know this sounds self-evident truth, but that is what you need to focus on, we need to focus on. By which I mean someone who would at least appear to represent the people of Hong Kong and not fearful of relaying to the Chinese authority those views which are considered to be discordant music to the ears in the North. But the most preponderant misreading on the part of the chief executive of Hong Kong is to second guess what the Chinese government does not want to hear. These furtive considerations do a great deal of damage to the status of the chief executive, because even before asking, he has turned himself into a puppet on a string, dancing obsequiously to the tunes and echoes of Zhongnan Hai. I would even wish for a chief executive who was cunning enough to persuade the Chinese government to hear openly the grievances of Hong Kong, whilst knowing full well that they will fall on deaf ears. But at least under these open circumstances, we will obtain an airing of what those grievances are. Then sooner or later, people will become conscious for the need of compromise. And therein lies the secret of civilization, divergent views being brought closer together openly through peaceful, intellectual, and intelligent negotiations. That, in a nutshell, is what Hong Kong is crying out loud for. A mediator or a group of mediators who could bring those pan-democrats and the stiff establishment around the same table and begin the process of some kind of reconciliation. As a citizen of Hong Kong, born and bred below Lion Rock, I was really sad to see the anger, or should I say Tourette's, displayed by those well-meaning legislators who were ejected from the chamber in front of an ossified face of our chief executive. These tribal confrontations exemplify deep bitterness and resentment and precisely represent the fundamental and symptomatic illnesses of our territory. They are similar to the rift between the Shiites and the Sunnis, the Arabs and the Jews, and the North and the South Koreans. But there is so much more hope of a lasting ceasefire in our case because we have, thankfully, at least not shed any real blood. Not yet. Indeed, the Chinese Authority could simply transform our entire livelihood tomorrow by becoming a mediator of the two opposing sides. The two sides must meet. They must sit down opposite each other. They must start talking. They must carry a modicum of goodwill on each of their part. It is only when the stinging palpitations of our political polarizations are diffused that we could once again return to a marvelous and civilized legislature that has served Hong Kong well before its fragmentations that are damaging the fabric of our society before our own eyes. If we're not careful and simply let alone the sour enemies sit inert, in stalemate, across each other on the chamber floor at LegCo, then we will be throwing away what we've managed to build, totally against the odds, a solid and burnished rock that was once considered merely as barren. Churchill was supposed to have said, democracy is the worst kind of government, except for those others which have been tried. I should like to think that Hong Kong is the worst kind of place in which to live, except for those others which have been tried. My point here is that given all the problems we have with a deteriorating administration that half confesses itself to have a legislature that is becoming ungovernable and losing confidence amongst the majority of the population by the day, with a chief executive whose popularity is at its historic low, we must still cling on to Hong Kong as our home. But we cannot afford to stand by our status quo. Our government has been growing apart from the people of Hong Kong, and they must anticipate trouble. Already there are over 1 million people in Hong Kong who are trapped by poverty, and they cannot be too pleased about the government. It is simply invidious that in a prosperous community such as Hong Kong, over 15% of our population should be living below the breadline. It is a shameful state, scandalous if you ask me. Then there was the umbrella movement, which clearly demonstrated the resolution of many ordinary people taking real democratic powers seriously, and their dissatisfaction can only be increased by the defeat of the universal suffrage motion in LegCo. Then the disturbing case of Li Po and his colleagues, and those hawkers openly branded as separatists by the liaison office. To compound our problems, the dwindling numbers of visitors from the mainland, financial oscillations in the markets, not to mention the growing number of the aged against the falling number of our workforce, the umpteen cases of abduction in the mainland, about which we hear very little, the dark appearances of the triads at demonstrations, the thorough incompetence of the government in creating a proper cultural anchor in the city. There are many more things which need fixing, and most of them could not be achieved given the standoff between the pan-democrats, representing the majority of ordinary people, and the establishment, so-called, hugging most of our somnambulant tycoons and that elephantine Communist Party in China. Thank God, we still have a decent judicial system and a fairly uncorrupted community and genuine freedom in Hong Kong. This holy trinity, which is what I call it, is the fortune that remains the pride of Hong Kong people. You think Shanghai, say, with her mainland judicial system and corruption and lack of freedom, could overtake Hong Kong as China's premier city? You will have to be utterly insane and stupid. Ergo, we must hang on to this holy trinity of a decent judicial system, an uncorrupted community, and genuine freedom until the bitter end of 2047 at least. In my moments of fantasy, I even think that Hong Kong could play a vital role in shaping the future of China. Why else would 50 million mainlanders come flooding through Hong Kong every year? It's because of our Holy Trinity. This would make the 7 million of us in Hong Kong the greatest and freest de facto Chinese diaspora, which in turn could change the course of Chinese history in our lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I haven't talked rubbish. I don't think I have, but if you think I have, challenge me, and I'll tell you what rubbish you talk. Only joking. Thank you very much.
Questions for Sir David? Who'd like to start? We'll start over here.
If you can comment, care to comment. Thank you.
There might have been one or two little incidents of tiny support of, let's say, an American businessman or an American official, semi-official, helping a little bit. I mean, there might be some sort of cockroach evidence, but if you thought that our city, full of extremely bright, young, and loyal young people, need or require the conspiracy outside of Hong Kong to support a movement that was genuinely moving, I think that is far-fetched in itself. So, in a nutshell, no, but we count the days when this evidence is being produced. And I have to tell you that some very serious people, some very influential people I know in Hong Kong, keep telling that. They don't live in Hong Kong, they own a lot of Hong Kong. They come and say, oh, it's the Americans or the CIA or the whatever. I think that's absolutely balderdash.
Do you think Britain owes Hong Kong a bit more support? Or do you think they...
Listen, Britain left $3 trillion US behind. What more do you want them to do? And this joint declaration must be one of the most successful international negotiated agreements in the history of the modern world, during which, and now, we're living it through for the next 34 years or whatever, has been, on the whole, quite good. So I don't think we should blame Britain. And also, there's no point harping back. I mean, if you want to apportion blame, then you have to go back to the Opium War and even before that. Nobody is perfect. But the fact that Britain left Hong Kong intact, did not take 1 cent, and even have to pay the rent for the building they built as the British consulate, is an absolute shining example of where they actually been extremely good to Hong Kong and has done everything possible. And you couldn't have a greater champion than the last governor, Chris Patten, in trying to install a system of government or politics that would maximize the possibility of Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong. I don't think we should blame Britain at all.
And how do you read it?
Well, the fact that he left his passport behind must have meant that somebody fairly high up has managed to get him into China. And you wouldn't be able to do that unless you had very high up authority. So the presumption is that he was, in effect, abducted across. And of course, this is indeed a very serious matter, not only about the breach of the Joint Declaration, but as a very fundamental principle of one country, two system. And it sets an extremely bad example. Now, there had been, in fact, if I might venture to say this, a previous example of something like that. We found the young chairman of the Mingxing Bank being taken away from his residence in the Peak. We don't know what happened there, but I heard rumors that, in fact, the police were asked not to be around his residence around that time. Although the chairman has been released and come back to Hong Kong, obviously, when you come out of Hong Kong, you're always very nice about what actually happened, and you muddy the whole thing over. but that was at least one case where this has happened. And I think it is absolutely essential for us to stand fast on this one, and amazingly, even CY himself has come up strongly against it, although it's sort of paying lip service because we haven't seen Mr. Li Po, and it would be very nice if he were to appear in Hong Kong. If it was true, then I don't think anybody need to worry about it, because all the president does is to say that's made up or whatever it is. And if it is not true, then the president should actually try to nail the guy who publishes this defamation. And so the incident itself, I think, is insignificant, but the symbolic taking of him has certainly created a problem in our fears for what might come next. But I've heard, actually, immediately, the Chinese authorities have now been told that, or certainly the civil servants who carry out these sort of things, not to come to Hong Kong anymore. They are slightly edgy about this bad press, and that I know one or two of my friends who were supposed to have been questioned say, okay, well, you come to Hong Kong and question me. I'm not coming to China. Because, you know, there are a lot of people who go to China and they disappear. We don't hear a lot of those. But a couple of my friends say, well, you come to Hong Kong, and they say, no, we're not coming to Hong Kong, and if we do, we'll allow you to have a solicitor present or a policeman present and be represented. So, in a way, this incident has diffused that wind of bad change a bit, which I hope will carry on.
I'm sorry, I can't. Francis.
The trouble is that Hong Kong is not full of statesmen. It's very easy. They have to come halfway. Both sides have got to come halfway. You know, now it's come to an impasse. And I mean, looking at Letchko is a sorrowful sight, as I said. And they really need to sit down and patch up their differences. If there had been a Mandela reconciliation, if Arafat could shake hands with the Israeli president, if after ping-pong diplomacy, Nixon could go to China, this is a small matter in a very parochial town. It's almost like an episode out of a trollop. It really shows how insular we are. And I blame the government, because if anybody should make a stand, it should be the government saying, okay, look, listen, we agree on differences, but let's see whether we can narrow our differences and make it all work for the interest of the people of Hong Kong. I think that has got to come, because if the pan-democrats have asked continually for audiences and so forth, and they've just been shut away, that's never going to happen. And I postulate another mediator. The other mediator is the Chinese authorities. They can just come down and say, okay, let's have a truce, and let's hear what you both guys have to say and how you can resolve this, so that, you know, Letchko can function a bit more effectively. They got to sit down. It cannot carry on. And it's now getting boring. Before he was sad, now he's boring and sad. And he will be even more boring and more sad if it were to carry on. I mean, I saw the footage. I mean, I don't know whether you saw the footage with 4 people with their banners now, and it's getting like Taiwan. The next thing, they'll be chucking chairs at each other. This is not how a civilized legislature should behave.
That the government at least has absolutely no interest in sitting down and talking.
So we have a very decent place here, and it's not perfect, but I can't think of a better place where there's more efficiency, better food, better freedom, better judicial system, and so forth. We've got to fight for it. I mean, there's no point saying it's too bad. People of Hong Kong has got to go and voice their opinions rather than on one side, for both sides to come together. I mean, as I said, huge differences have been patched up in the history of the modern world. Why can't we patch up this tiny difference in a tiny conclave, in a tiny foothill of a huge country and a huge world? Does it say something about the caliber of our people, our state of mind? So somebody asked me who might come up. I don't know. I mean, somebody should come up, and I think it's more likely to be somebody in the middle. But it's got to get the authorities to agree first. I mean, I really was saddened by the fact that during the umbrella movement, Occupy Central, that they did not, the authorities didn't even want to come out and talk to anybody. As I said, even Li Peng did. So, I mean, it's just absurd. They've got to see how small they are. And we've got to make them see how small they are, and they've got to grow up. I mean, they've got to grow up. I mean, look at the policy address. I mean, look at everything that comes out of the government now is one huge tedium. I mean, there's no excitement. Certainly, there's not a ounce of sense of humor. I mean, I was at the government house last night for the big doodah. The Hong Kong Bank actually shortened their board meeting because they said they didn't want to be late beyond 5 o'clock because they were fearful of the chief executive being annoyed if they were late. The whole board of HSBC stopped in time at 4:45 and ran over to Government House. And everybody was shaking hands, bowing, completely pointless ocean of people. Celebrating what? Nothing. One huge scenery of oil spill. I mean, that might be comparable to Exxon Valdez. You couldn't even get near to the chief executive who was up there.
We have a question over here.
Yes.
Thank you, Sir David. My name is John Antweiler. I'm an American. That's not an apology. That's just the truth.
Do you think Donald Trump will become president?
I hope not.
I was asked what I thought if he did. I said he would be flying on Air Force One.
A question for you and an assessment of the journalists and the media. Do you think that the issues that you've highlighted have been fairly portrayed and robustly portrayed by the media, or do you think that the media is basically kowtowing to Beijing?
What do you mean in Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong.
Well, there's a South China Morning Post, which you can spend 3 minutes reading, and that's about it in the morning. But I have to say that it does report certain things which you would have thought is not the kind of news that China wants to hear. So there is a sort of modicum of independence in the only newspaper, English language newspaper in Hong Kong. And of course, there are also the Chinese press. But the print is going out of fashion, and everybody's going on the media. And the question to us is not what the press says now in a community like this, is what the social media say. I have to say also, I switched on the television, and the local television station, Pearl, during Christmas and New Year when I was here, just to see what the local people were watching. I mean, utter crap. I mean, it has not moved on from Foon Lok Gum Seal 30 years ago, okay? And an absolute nonsensical rubbish, okay? So I asked myself, should we blame ourselves for being so starved and so parochial in not wanting something a bit better? And this, I also blame the government for not realizing that this matter of culture and art are so important to a city that wants to be international. We call this Asia World City or something, don't we? Is it World Asia City or Asia World City? Anyway, they can't distinguish a noun from an adjective. But anyway, whatever it is, Asia World City or something, which doesn't mean anything. And look at the debacle over the West Kowloon Cultural District Center. After 15 years, when all of us in the business of art institutions say, make sure you appoint somebody who knows what they're talking about, who's run institutions before, and leave them alone, and get their experts in. They appointed somebody who used to run housing department. I mean, it is an absurdity. And that has been going on, and nothing happens. I mean, I'm thankful that occasionally Madonna comes to Hong Kong. My daughter, whose tickets I gave to last night, told me it was fantastic. So at least there's some excitement. And that man who was blamed for bringing Rolling Stones and all those people, what was his name? Michael Rouse, I think. I think he was a genius. I think at least we had something to look forward to and not having to worry about reading tedious documents from the government. I mean, that policy address, I promise you, I read it twice. I forced myself to read it twice. It's so turgid, it's so disingenuous, it's so vacuous that if I was marking it as a PhD, I would retrospectively make the candidate cancel his BA and MA, go back to kindergarten.
As the government is refusing to make a move to talk to people and in the opposite party, people are actually considering even more extreme measures than the umbrella movement. So what do you think of the...
No, listen, it's marvelous. All of you young people, as I was, we all have rebellious views. We all have views which we think we can change the world with and so forth. It's all a healthy sign of a vibrant and free society. I'll say this to the students, Occupy Central. I'm on the whole sympathetic, but they are entirely wrong. I'll tell you why, and I blame the Hong Kong government in particular for not explaining it properly, and the Chinese government. Article 24, which is the actual central article that is the foundation of the argument, says expressly that it is the ultimate aim. Now, the whole clause is way down by this most important word, ultimate aim. For me, it means that there was always envisaged a temporal roadmap, the ultimate aim. Why would he say the ultimate aim? It's because there's 50 years, and he says between 1997 and 2046, or 7, we are going to select a chief executive through universal suffrage and a broad band of people who will be able to nominate. Now, what we were offered, in effect, was the first part of the two parts, namely universal suffrage. And of course, rightly, people say, that's not true democracy because you only got one part, and if the 1,200 people who are puppets, they're not really giving us the right candidates. Correct. But it's only 17 years on. We still got 34. So actually, I am on the letter of the law on the side of the Chinese and the establishment, because it says it's the ultimate aim. Now, if the Hong Kong government from day one were to come out and say, now look, calm down, we still got 34 years ago. We've got the chance of the first part, so let's work on the second part. Perhaps after 7 more years, we will get the second part. And I think that that's the sadness of it all. Now, if I were to go and ask the professors who were behind the Occupy Central and the demonstration umbrella, I would like to ask them this, and I've asked a couple of them, and they have not been able to answer me. So I said, why did you not think that there was a temporary roadmap? And that clause 24 specifically uses the word ultimate, the ultimate aim. When you say the ultimate aim, means the ultimate aim, gradually, eventually. That's what it means.
We're going to go to Anna for one more question. We're getting close to the bewitching hour of 2 o'clock. So.
Okay. Sir David, Anna Fenton, former president of the club. 2 questions, one serious, one slightly less serious. Are you going to be happy in the future to look out of your window and see an artificial island called the East Lantau Metropolis, which will house up to 700,000 people in the harbour?
Which is the funny part?
That comes next.
Go on, ask me the funny part.
Well, I went to buy the FT the other day, and they didn't have it to read you, as usual, on a Saturday. But then I heard that it said an imposter had written your column, and it said David Tang's dog ate his homework.
Yeah, well, I tell you what happened. I filed late. I was in a rather remote area in Spain. I had to file on Monday, and there was no Wi-Fi and so forth. So I thought for a moment that I could be one day late. And I've heard journalists filing, and I mean lots of journalists here, filing one day late is nothing. And certainly my column, which actually I had to do 2 weeks in advance, right? So I thought everything was fine. And so I filed it on a Tuesday, but then there was a mistake. So I had to rectify that because apparently I was about to defame somebody, and the lawyers caught me. And so I had to rewrite it. By that time, it was too late. So my editor said, right, we're going to pull you and tell everybody that the dog ate your piece. So that's what it says, the dog ate my homework. And so in 3.5 years that I've been writing for the Financial Times, I was late and guillotined straight away, and they left me behind. But don't worry, it's going to come back next week. To your more serious question, I don't know whether it's serious or not. I don't know whether this will actually happen in the near future. I mean, you're asking me a question that is likely not to happen for another 20 or 30 years, perhaps?
Well, the chief executive has told them to get a move on with it.
The chief executive, you believe him?
No.
Have you not been listening to my speech? Are you mad? I always, when I give the occasional speech, I always get a question asked, especially outside of Hong Kong, so what was going to happen in 2047? What is going to happen in the next 100 years and so forth? It reminds me of a wonderful story of Sir Bernard Lovell, who was the president of the Royal Observatory, Astronomical Society, and he was about to retire at the age of 85. And he was interviewed by the BBC. He says, Sir Bernard, you've been president of the Royal Astronomical Society for so long, an extremely distinguished member in the astrological world and so forth. He said, what do you think about the Crab Nebula exploding in 146 million years' time? And he said, I couldn't give a fuck. So that might be the answer to your question.
Yeah, as you can guess, I hope you'll come round and at least have a drink in the main bar. You don't have to wear it, but thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for coming today.